Today I want to ask a question. Was Jesus poor? And I say that I want to ask it, not answer it, because I don't know that I have the answer. I don't know if you do either. Quite frankly, I don't think any of us necessarily are going to ever know for sure. I read a little bit about this, kind of seeing other people's takes and opinions and different verses on why they think that. I'm not a biblical scholar. I like to think that I know a little bit about the Bible. I did grow up in church. I went to Sunday school. I went to a Christian high school where you had to take a Bible class. I went to a Christian college where, again, you had to take some Bible classes. I was actually a theology major for a few semesters, so I do think that I have a decent understanding of Scripture, but I'm not claiming to be a theologian. I'm not claiming to have all the answers, to study out all the historical context and know everything. This is a question that I've actually thought about a lot growing up, even because the church that I went to growing up, people got mad at it a lot for saying they talk too much about money, and they don't like that our pastor is doing well financially. For a lot of people have a hard time with that. They think if you're in the ministry, you need to be poor. And the reason they say it a lot of times is because they say Jesus was poor. Quite frankly, at the end of the day, I still think it's not a huge deal because Jesus's call was different than my call and your call. You can't compare callings. Jesus was called to die at 33 years old. Obviously, there's a lot of really good Christians that have lived great, faithful lives that did not die at 33 years old. The Bible actually promises in the 10 Commandments that if you honor your father and mother, you'll have a long life. So let's get that out of the way first and foremost. But I do want to answer this question, or at least ask this question, because I don't know for sure, and I'd love to get some feedback from you guys. If you've read different things or have a different opinion about this, I want to have a discussion. I want to talk about this a little bit. When I've had this discussion with people or heard people discussing this, the first scripture that I hear people say who think Jesus was poor, the first scripture they bring out is Matthew 8:20, where it says that Jesus didn't have a place to lay his head. So they say, look, he was poor, he didn't have a home, he lived out on the streets. Okay, first of all, to me what that verse is just saying is that he traveled a lot. He didn't have a home, he didn't have a place where he was, at the end of the day, I go back to this place. He lived on the road, and traveling can be difficult. If you've ever been in a traveling ministry or just toured for music or whatever, like, it can be difficult always being on the road. Quite frankly, Joss and I are in a stage in our life right now where it feels a little unsettled because we don't know how long we're gonna be in Southern California. We're renting out a small 1-bedroom apartment, even though we have a house still in Osseo, Minnesota. We're renting that out to people from church, but we don't feel settled necessarily. It would be nice to be like, okay, this is where you're gonna be for the next 10 years, put some decorations on the wall, make this place feel like home. Also, moving to Southern California has kind of changed my perspective on that a little bit, because growing up in Minnesota, if you lived on the streets or in your car and were homeless, you were actually homeless. Like, you didn't have a better place to stay. I know people out here who have lived in their cars for periods of time, not because they were so poor. They had full-time jobs. They just didn't want to spend the money on an apartment at that season in their life. And living in Southern California, especially in San Diego, where it doesn't even get too hot even, you can theoretically live in your car. There are people that live on the beach. I'm not saying that every person homeless out here isn't hurting, isn't in need, but there are some people that choose it. There are some people that honestly choose to live in their car or van or to literally just sleep on the beach, and they're okay. It's not that big of a deal. Some of them, they say, I'd rather live on the beach than work a full-time job. That's their choice, I guess. That's a no place to lay their head kind of situation where you're always kind of just on the move, living in your car, on the beach, whatever that is. So it's possible that Jesus just made the choice that I'm gonna be in ministry, I'm gonna be out on the road all the time, going from town to town, traveling, healing, that I'm not gonna buy a house. I'm not gonna have a place to live. I'm not gonna have a home necessarily. I'm just gonna travel a lot. I don't think that means he was poor, because I think you can have plenty of money and still travel a lot. Another thing that people like to point to say that Jesus was poor is that he was born in a manger, that he wasn't in a hotel or a hospital, he was out with the animals in the stable. But Luke 2:7 clearly says there was no room in the inn, and we all know that, we've all heard that before, there's no room in the inn. It doesn't mean they couldn't afford an inn, it means there wasn't room for them. So all the rooms were full, so they had to go outside. So again, it could mean that they were poor, that he was born in the manger, but just because he was born in a manger doesn't mean he was poor. And if anything, it probably says that they did have money, because there's no room in the inn, which means they were willing to rent out a room for the night, but there just wasn't one available. The other thing about that story of his birth in the manger is that we know the 3 wise men came and brought him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which means at least at that time, somebody came and gave them a lot of money, and this is when he was just a baby. And gold, I know, was worth a lot. I don't know about frankincense and myrrh, but I'm sure there's some sort of monetary value to those things. And I don't know how much gold he brought him, but it's probably safe to assume that if those three people brought pretty nice gifts, then there might have been other people that came and brought them gifts, right? Like, we don't know about the other ones. So it's possible that just by him being born, he was given some financial things, and then why wouldn't that carry through his life? Especially when he goes into ministry, it's very possible that when he ministers to people with money, that they give some to him. I don't think it's that far-fetched to assume that, not that he necessarily took a tithe and offering at every service that he preached at, but I think it's very possible that God provided for Jesus through people that had a lot of money and helped kind of sustain his ministry. But the verse that I read the other day that made me kind of restart thinking about all this stuff is actually in Luke 9 when he's talking about feeding the 5,000. You all know the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, right? There's a lot of people, they don't have food. He brings the loaves and fishes, breaks them up, gives them to everybody, and a small lunch ends up feeding 5,000 men, possibly women and children there as well. To me, it's kind of weird when people are like, oh yeah, it's actually 20,000 people. It's like, dude, feeding 5,000 is already a miracle. Let's not speculate to how many more people there could have been. Let's just go with 5,000. It's pretty impressive on its own. If you add women and children, it was probably more, but at least 5,000 people. But here's what he says in verse 13. But he said to them, you give them something to eat. And they said, we have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all these people. For there were about 5,000 men. So I was reading that verse, and I was like, it literally says, the disciples literally asked Jesus, should we go buy them something to eat? And to me, I was like, wait a minute. Does that mean they had enough money to buy food to feed 5,000 people? Because that's not poor. I'm not saying that they were wealthy and that they were rich and just, making it rain at every service, but that they had enough money to even question him, should we go buy food for 5,000 people? I don't think they were sarcastic. I think they literally had the money for it. I also think that Jesus had a job. We know at some point, we know that his dad had a job because he was a carpenter, and he took up Joseph's business and was also a carpenter. So at some point he made some money. What he did with that, we don't know. Maybe, he wasn't until he was 30 that he went into the ministry. Maybe he, was a carpenter for 15 years and saved up all that money so that when it was time to travel, he had the money to go and travel. I don't know. The Bible doesn't make that clear. Maybe they just depended on the Lord and he just provided for them. Maybe people that he ministered to gave him money. We know that one woman broke a very expensive oil and anointed him. And he said that was okay. He wasn't mad at him, even though when people wanted to say, oh, we should use that money, sell it and give it to the poor. They probably did a lot of outreach if they did have money. Judas was their treasurer. So they had to have some sort of financial somewhere. Maybe it was a small amount, but you don't have a treasurer if you don't have any money at all. Also, Judas was stealing from the treasury, right? Don't we know that? So if there's enough that he can steal without people noticing, they probably have more than enough to meet their needs. So I don't know. I read it, I think that Jesus probably had some money, and I don't think he was that poor, and I don't think he was that broke. I don't think you have to be poor and broke to be in ministry. I'm not trying to justify greed by any stretch of the imagination. Please don't misunderstand me. Believe me, I believe that giving is one of the most important things that you can do on this earth. Quite frankly, being generous with your time and your money, and especially if you have enough for your needs, then help meet the needs of others. And I believe that Jesus did, and his ministry, I believe, was a big part, was ministering to the poor. And I think that we should too. But I think this is an interesting conversation because I think the idea of Christians having money makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And I want to know what people think if, theoretically, Jesus had a little bit of money too. And when they start their argument of why Christians shouldn't have money or ministers shouldn't have any sort of money, they should be poor. When they start that with Jesus was poor, I'm not sure that he was. And so, again, not saying I have the answers, but really want to bring up this question. And I want to have a discussion with any of you guys if you think I'm completely wrong and you have some scriptures to tell me why. I'd love to hear that, quite frankly. I would love to hear from you, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook. Comment below. Let me know what you think. I want to know. I'm questioning this, and I just want to know. I don't know if it's the end of the world. My salvation's not hanging on it. I just want to know what other people think, what you found in your readings, in your discussions. Was Jesus poor?